Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And this week I'm putting together some James Bond themed pixel art, and this is going to be in the style of like a mobile game for old school Nokia phones. So this is being made on a canvas size of 96 by 65 pixels, and it's all going to be done in a 1-bit style just like those displays. I happen to be working in black and gray for now, just because I kind of find it easier on the eyes than using anything else. But by the end, we'll actually kind of give it that green dot matrix look like those screens actually have. The reason this whole project idea came about is because there's this community event going on right now that's called the Nokia Art Jam. So this is organized over on Itch, and this year the theme is to imagine a game that Bond might be playing on his mobile phone, which is kind of a joke, like based on this image of him looking like he's having a blast on a phone that actually kind of resembles something similar to a Nokia. This one actually happens to be an Ericsson phone, and this comes from a scene in Tomorrow Never Dies where he's using that phone to drive his car and fire off all the cool gadgets to evade the bad guys and all that kind of slick James Bond stuff. Now, in kind of the swirl of excitement of seeing the Jam theme announced and realizing that I hadn't actually watched a Bond movie in quite a few years, I ended up rewatching Tomorrow Never Dies, had fun watching it again, and I started feeling like the most fun thing to do in that moment is just going to be to adapt scenes from the movie into almost like this idea of a forgotten Nokia game that, you know, maybe was rushed out to coincide with the movie release. So this first artwork that you're seeing me put together is like a little flight combat level. And this is based on the intro scene from Tomorrow Never Dies, where Bond is he's flying a plane and he's trying to divert a missile strike while also being chased by enemies in planes, of course. Now, there's obviously not a ton of room to work with on this canvas, but this one was actually a really good warm-up just for getting a couple sprites onto the screen for the planes and the missile. I snuck in a HUD up there with a few different ability icons. And then I finished it off with these layers of mountains and kind of this little dot pattern to try and give it like a snowy look, which is like the setting from the film. The second mock-up that I want to do is in that iconic Bond game first-person shooter style. To keep the pixel art looking clean, I'm building the pistol using a pixel angle of 2:1 on the right side, and then a 45-degree line of pixels on the left. And those two lines sort of converge at the barrel to give that perspective that we're looking for of him holding the pistol. As a side note, I was doing some research on Nokia games because I was curious if a 3D shooter like this would have even been possible on any of the 3000 series phones. And I found there was actually a 3D platformer that was released for the Nokia 3410 called Monkiki's Castles. Now, I'm not really sure if something like this performs that well. And truthfully, thinking about a Bond FPS is probably asking too much, especially if this is supposed to be like 1997. But I like that there's at least a precedent for 3D games having been tried on this hardware at some point. The final details I'm working out here are for the enemy and the background design. Now, instead of going for something that was kind of like a generic, armed guard sort of thing, I decided to pull in actually the main villain from Tomorrow Never Dies, who's this powerful media mogul guy called Elliot Carver. So in the movie, he runs a satellite news network, and essentially he has, his team of bad guys who will go and carry out like terrorist acts. And then he'll kind of spin up a news segment that makes it look like those things were done by the military of a different country. And then it causes all this political turmoil, and he's trying to start a war and this kind of thing. And I guess profit out of it by being the guy who runs the news. I don't know. Honestly, though, it's kind of an interesting premise to look at, especially from today's media landscape. And I really like this line from him where he said, "Words are the new weapons." He didn't say Mr. Bond at the end of that. I definitely just added that, for that familiar drama. But I liked that I could kind of squeeze in some of the movie premise into this mock-up and have him there surrounded by all his TV screens in that. Alright, the final mock-up is going to bring it back to that car chase scene. So to get this started, I'm going to block out the canvas and section it off into a bunch of different areas. And the idea here is that I want to challenge myself to try and fit in lots of additional visuals and functionality that we can imagine to go along with this remote control car concept. Everything like little gadget icons and a mini map, a spot for messages, and of course like the main play area for the driving part of the game. I feel like it's the case when the canvas size is small, it causes me to want to fill it with so many more things because it's such a challenge to get it to work. you wouldn't think that it could work, and maybe it won't. But I like the challenge of like trying to fit all these different little pieces into this small space. All right, the final touch we should do for these mockups is to give them that dot matrix appearance of the Nokia display, where there's sort of a grid-like separation to the pixels. The first thing I'll do is scale the image by a factor of 10. So whereas the original was 96 by 65, it now becomes 960 by 650 pixels. Next, I'm going to come in with the pencil tool set to 1 pixel, and on a new layer, I'm just going to draw a white line from the top to the bottom. And since everything is scaled by that factor of 10, that 1 pixel now looks like it's just shaving off a tenth of the artwork. If we duplicate this line across the canvas, and then take that whole assembly and duplicate it and rotate it so we have another set running horizontally, we'll get like a full grid covering the whole artwork. As a last step, I'm going to merge the full image and then replace the white with this lime green sort of color that I've picked out to represent my display backing. Now, depending on whether or not this display is illuminated, you tend to see very different greens in different photos of this phone. But I just sort of chose this as like a pleasant looking kind of in between to get the idea across. So there's our full set of Nokia style Tomorrow Never Dies mockups. And I kind of felt like there was something else that was still just sort of missing from this idea of the game adaptation. So I bashed together a little surprise sequence here that you can take a look at. To create this one, I started with the isolated footage from the movie, obviously, and I scaled that down into the Nokia display size. Then in Photoshop, I used an import option that's called Import Video Frames to Layers. And what that does is it actually turns a movie clip into an animated GIF. And once it was in that format, it was easier to kind of manipulate, and I forced it into black and white. I did a little bit of editing, and then obviously did that whole dot matrix workup like we did with the others. I'll put a link down below if you're interested in participating in the Nokia Art Jam. It's going to be running till the end of April, which is about a week and a half from when I'm posting this. Or even if you just want to hop over there and check out all the different artist submissions. And otherwise, we'll close this out with some CRT time. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.
Your new telephone. Talk here. Listen. I doubt if she'll remember me.
Remind her, then pump her for information.
And this, I'm particularly proud of. Words are the new weapons. I never believe I ring the press anyway. Remote control for your car.
You'll just have to decide how much pumping is needed, James.
Tap.